Hi Founder fans, Jason here, and today we're going to talk about spies. Yes, everyone's favorite, spies of the American Revolution. Very particularly, we are going to be talking about Austin Roe. Austin Roe is part of the now fairly famous Culper Ring. The Culper Spy Ring had a show on AMC a few years back called Turn. It's a fun show. It does have some horrifying historical inaccuracies, which is strange because Alexander Roe wrote a great book that's very accurate on the subject, and then also was one of the writers for the show, and he just gave up on being accurate by season 2. And we are going to talk a little bit about some of the mistakes he made in that show, very specifically about Austin Roe. Now, Roe, I will acknowledge, is particularly close to my heart. I grew up in Patchogue, New York, which is on the south shore of Long Island, and that just so happens to be where Austin Roe is buried. He may not be the only founder buried in that town, but he is surely the most significant, if not well known to the general public. So, quickly, the way the spy ring worked is, Nathaniel Hale tried to spy, and then he quickly got hung and had my only regret is I have but one life to give for my country, that famous line. He was famous for being found, but we often overlook it. He was found right away. And unfortunately for him, he was just not good at being a spy. So Washington learned his lesson and recruited Benjamin Talmadge, who was a friend of Hale's from Yale, and recruited him to set up a new spy ring. And what Talmadge had originally grown up in Setauket on Long Island on the North Shore. So what Talmadge would do is he would have one friend, Caleb Brewster, row a boat across the Long Island Sound and give information to Abraham Woodhull in Setauket, who was kind of the head of the ring. And Woodhull would send today's subject, Austin Roe, to New York City, and Roe would talk with one of the final people, Robert Townsend. And Townsend would give him information from within the British-held New York City, and then Roe would go back and give information to Woodhull, who would give it to Brewster, who would row back up against the Sound, and then go to Talmadge, and get to Washington. And this ring was fabulously important because Washington used this information often for strategizing the war, finding out what the British were planning, how can we counter that, they're over there, but, are they trying to trick us, what's going on? It was extraordinarily helpful for Washington and the Continental Army at large. So, Austin Roe, in particular, as I said, would take the long ride from Setauket to New York City and back. Now, the reason he was picked to take the ride is, first of all, he was friends with these people. Second of all, he was a patriot. But third of all, and most importantly, he owned Roe Tavern, which was on the main thoroughfare from this side of Long Island to New York City. This is the east, from east to west, although you're seeing it in reverse. So, because he owned a tavern, he legitimately had to go to New York and back to secure provisions for his business. So, although he may have ridden on horseback a few times, he would generally have taken not a horse and buggy, a carriage with 2 horses, a wagon, to and fro. But still, I don't have the math on me on hand, but it's a fairly long ride. I mean, it takes 45 minutes to drive one way today, and then 45 minutes to drive back, assuming there's no traffic, but that's not the point. So he rode hundreds of miles in the 3 or 4 years he was part of the spy ring. And, possibly thousands. Again, I haven't calculated it, but possibly over 1,000 miles back and forth to New York City, talking to one person, taking information, bringing it back for Washington. After the war was over, Washington did his famous tour of the North. After he became president, he did his famous tour of the North. And when he did, he came through Setauket and he stayed at the house of Austin Roe, or I should say that Austin Roe Tavern. And Washington actually slept at his house that night. Now, there's no... Washington called his stay tolerably decent, which sounds like he's not happy. But that's how we feel today, and if we look at it from the language of the day, tolerably decent means, pretty good. Considering it was a very small village, way out in what was then, I'd say the frontier of Long Island, if you could call it that. That area would not be settled like it is anywhere near today for 150 years. So, that being said, Roe would later, I think during the Jefferson administration, move to Patchogue and build a hotel, and then die there and be buried there. And 200 years later, I would be born and grow up there. And I would live off Roe Boulevard. So, again, that's why I'm particularly attached to this founder. But I need to establish some, we'll call them quarrels with that show Turn on AMC. Now, I will say, if you haven't seen it, you should watch it. It's fun. It's American Revolution. Take everything they say with a big shovel full of salt, because there's a lot. They attribute a lot to a small group of people, and there were more people involved than just that. Very specifically, though, Austin Roe is really, really, really not only neglected, but Robert Rogers, who not only in the show but in real life was a loyalist who fought for the Queen, he at one point tells people he's Austin Roe and uses it as a pseudonym. So even worse than leaving Roe out entirely, which they almost did, instead they give his name as an alias for one of the villains, which in my opinion is worse. This is a guy who risked life and limb several occasions and rode hundreds, if not thousands of miles in secret, and no one would know he did it for 150 years when we finally figured out about the spy ring. He did it just for his country. He never thought he would be given any credit. And the way Alexander Rose and his writing team reward this man, again, Rose had written the original book, or one of the books, a very good book that's historically accurate and gives Roe his credit. Then he writes this show that just destroys his name. I'm upset. I apologize, but it's really, really hard to stomach when you know Roe's story. And even worse, at the end, Washington comes back, but instead of coming back to Roe Tavern like he actually did in real life, he goes back to the other tavern they have in the show in town that's given to someone else. It's some garbage, and it's garbage. Again, it's a fun show if you like the American Revolution. And some of the things they get right. But as far as Austin Roe, not only do they get him wrong, they do him possibly the greatest injustice that can possibly be done. They basically slander his name. I'm sorry if I got a little heated in this video. I'm a huge fan of Austin Roe. So I'm going to go cool off, drink some water. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this, please like. If you have not subscribed yet, definitely subscribe. And if you wanted to learn about any other founders, please leave me a comment. Tell me what you think. If there's a founder from your hometown you'd like to learn more about, here I am. I will be happy to learn about it and tell you. Until then, you have a great afternoon, and we will see you tomorrow.